kind of idea that finally there are some adults in the room. And now that they're gone, there's some skepticism as to whether they were a good choice to have within the administration. How do you think the public should evaluate the readiness of retired military officers to serve as civilian policymakers?
I would say if you look at the broad throw of American history, we have plenty of examples of outstanding former military officers who go on to serve the nation at extraordinary levels. I was the 16th Supreme Allied Commander of NATO. The first was General Dwight David Eisenhower, who of course became I would argue, very successful two-term president. I could go on and on. George Marshall, who serves both as Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, as well as having served during the war as effectively the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Colin Powell, who goes on to be, again, a very successful Secretary of Defense. I think if you look at the long throw of American history, there's plenty of examples of senior military, and by the way, mid-grade military and very former junior officer military who go on to do just extraordinary service. So I would think the public, if they had even a basic understanding of where some of our most successful national figures have come from, would continue to hope that former military at, again, every level would be willing to come into government and serve.
I want to backtrack to 2016, where there was a lot of controversy about retired generals and admirals deciding to make political endorsements and political statements. How do you think voters should think about the role of retired flag officers playing in the political campaign process?
I am perfectly comfortable with retired senior military advising campaigns, endorsing candidates, running for office. There's a long and rich history of that in the United States. We mentioned Eisenhower a few moments ago. I see nothing wrong with that. And I believe that the public is sophisticated enough to know the difference between a retired general and a retired admiral, and an active duty general and an active duty admiral. And so I have zero problem with that. And I recognize there are many senior military, including Admiral Mullen, with whom I've had this conversation on several occasions, who take an opposite view of that. General Dempsey, former chairman, I think, also believes that when senior military get involved in that way, that it makes life much harder for the active duty. I just have never found it that way. And I believe that you serve the country as an active duty officer, and when you're done, you're done. And I don't think you go on wearing those stars for the rest of your life and therefore carry some kind of duty never to engage in the political arena. So I'm very comfortable with retired military getting engaged.
Shifting gears a little bit, a few weeks ago, you wrote an op-ed in Time magazine about how there hasn't been a Pentagon press briefing in over 300 days. We were wondering if you could talk a little bit about why that's an important issue to you right now.
I am concerned anytime our government does not interact deeply and broadly with the American press. And it's always fashionable to kind of bash the press and bash the media. And I would say that if you're in the media, you know you're doing a good job when the Obama administration is dissatisfied with you and then the Trump administration is dissatisfied with you. That's just the norm of the media. But the media serve a vital function in any democracy, and I think particularly here in the United States. And so I am concerned when I see any organ of government backing away from engagement with the media, but I'm particularly concerned when I see our military do it. And the reason is because of the gravity and the weight of the missions that our military accomplishes, both life and death, literally, in an operational context, but also the strategic importance of our engagement. And I think, therefore, the Department of Defense really is surrendering a very powerful tool on kind of three levels. One is to set an example. We like to think of ourselves in the military as the keepers of integrity and honesty and truth. And courage and honor and commitment to give the Navy core values. When you refuse to interact with the media, you're not setting a good example, in my view, of standing up to those values of truth and integrity. Secondly, we surrender a channel from which we can provide input and examples of what we are doing to our partners, allies, and friends. Believe me, all around the world, people watch those press conferences and they want to know what the United States is doing in a military and in other contexts. So if we're not doing that kind of engagement with the media, our allies, partners, and friends don't have a chance to, in a very fulsome way, see what we're doing. And then thirdly, and maybe most importantly, if we're not engaging with the media, we're not sending people out, our adversaries are not able to see the power and the scope and the capabilities of the U.S. military. That has a very profound deterrent effect. And if we're not going to be engaging with the military, and I'm not just talking about press conferences in the Pentagon, I mean embedding reporters, bringing observers out to sea on our carriers and our submarines, sending them into the field with our ground units, flying them in our planes. That is a very powerful deterrent effect. So I think it's a real miss on all of those levels for us not to be interacting early and often with the media.
Did you see the follow-up response to your op-ed published on the Modern War Institute?
I did not.
It was written by an Army PAO, and his argument was essentially, how can we as the military feel comfortable giving press conferences when we can't trust the media to report honestly? I was wondering if you have any response thoughts to that argument.
His basic argument was that not doing press briefings is a way to keep the military out of politics, and that if there were press briefings, there would probably be political questions that would, the answers would be politicized as a pro or anti-Trump sort of thing.
I'm surprised to hear a PAO take that position. And I interact frequently with PAOs at all levels, and I've never heard a single one take a position along those lines. And I think that's a mistake and a misunderstanding of kind of PAO 101. Any public affairs professional will tell you the media gets to pick the question, but here's a newsflash, you get to pick the answer. And if you don't want to dive into the morass of politics, you can quite easily in a press conference simply say, I'd refer that question to the Department of Defense, or refer it to the White House, or refer it to State Department, or simply decline to answer it. Anytime you are saying that you don't want to take advantage of the 90% of good things because you're scared of the 10% that might go wrong, you're really missing the mission on public affairs. So I'm surprised to hear that. What was the rank of the officer who purported to have that view?
I'm not actually certain.
I can't remember. I think he might have been
He may have been a captain.
Yeah, I think in 03 and 04.
I'm not sure. It was an op-ed that was published on the MWI website, and there was a pretty fierce backlash to it on the internet from a lot of scholars and retired PAOs. So it seems like it's been addressed a lot, but we just wanted to get your take on it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So you've written this op-ed. You've also written many books and many publications. You did a PhD in the middle of your career. So you've really established yourself within the military as having a reputation as a scholar and an academic. Whereas I think most people view military officers as mostly technical people, right? You just have to be proficient at your job, fly your plane, drive your ship, fire your weapons. Why did you think it was important to spend so much time on intellectual pursuits during your military career?
Well, there's certainly a personal component to that. I have always enjoyed reading, thinking, writing, and I think that those are core skills for any military officer. Certainly, all of our military leaders need to master the skills of the trade. And I would put, my ship handling abilities or my tactical warfighting skills up alongside anybody's. But I would say those are they are necessary, but they're not sufficient, in my view, for a military officer. And again, if you really look at the history of the military, so many of our military leaders are thinkers and writers as well as warriors. And I think you have to be able to do both if you're going to have a long-term career in the military. You can do very well, I would say, up to the 05 command level on a kind of purely tactical capability level. But I think beyond that, if you're going to have value to the organization, you've got to be able to operate on a wider plane. So that is what attracted me to it, both a personal interest in books and reading and writing. And in another life, I would have been a writer or been a media person. I think there's a whole different alternative Jim Stavridis out there. But I think also not only the personal, but my own view of the profession of arms is that it requires, the more senior you get, the more you have to read, think, write, and have the courage to publish your ideas.
So we have a lot of classmates here at the Harris School of Public Policy who will probably go into careers that have nothing to do with national security or defense policy, but they still might be influential someday, either at the federal level or the state level or the municipal level. What is the most important thing for them to know about the military?
I'll tell you three things I think are important for them to know about the military. And one you just touched on is that we are not like the Jack Nicholson character in A Few Good Men, frothing at the mouth at Guantanamo Bay, screaming, "You can't handle the truth." But I think it's important to know that we are a profession who will fight the nation's battles, but we also want to think our way through them. Number two, I would tell any civilian, and I often do, that the military works very hard to live up to courage, honor, commitment, truthfulness. Sometimes we fail, but when we do fail, we're accountable. And we're an organization that has core values. And then number three, I think I would say to your classmates that the military exists in the world, in the international world, and therefore represents the country in so many different ways. And that is important for them to understand that the military is not just a war-fighting machine, but also has a broad role as a representative of the United States, supporting our diplomats, supporting our development leaders, and that we are practitioners not only of those hard power skills that they associate with us, but also supporters of the most broad sense of who our country is in the world. I think all three of those things are important. Guys, I got time for one more.
Okay. When voters and citizens evaluate the success of the military, what kinds of things do you think they should be looking at?
They should, first and foremost, ask themselves about technical competence. Do we fly our planes safely? Do we operate our ships well? Is our ground forces capably operated in the field? And when something goes wrong, as it did 2 summers ago for the U.S. Navy with 2 terrible collisions, is there harsh, immediate, and effective accountability imposed on those who have failed? And do we make the effort to correct ourselves moving forward? Let's take those 2 collisions. The Navy went out afterwards and fired the 4-star, fired the 3-star, fired the 2-star, fired the Commodore, fired both ship captains, both ship executive officers, and the senior enlisted on both ships. I would defy any big corporation or bank in America to show me an instance where they have failed badly and have therefore imposed that kind of accountability. So I think civilians ought to continue to expect us to have high technical competence and the accountability that goes with it. Secondly, they should evaluate us on our effects. Are we capable of